All right, everybody. This week we have a very, very special guest for you all. Somebody who's deeply ingrained in the lore of this very show, created the greatest comic book villain of all time. I want everybody to welcome to the show Rachel Pollack.
Hi, Rachel.
How are we doing today, Rachel?
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction.
Oh, yes. And he's not joking. We tell everybody this, Rachel, that about Codpiece. I think almost everybody we've had that works at DC on the show, off camera, we're like, okay, the interview is great, but when are you going to use Codpiece?
Really? Wow, how interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I didn't know that was well remembered like that.
Yeah.
It's exciting,
but,
yeah.
Yeah, and we love the character. We want to talk about it, but also we want to talk about your kind of origin in comics. And I know you kind of got away from comics a little more. You write, prose novels, that kind of thing now. But kind of where did it all start for you?
Well, I've loved comics all my life, so I'm really, really old. Important fact about me. But I'm old enough that I actually got to read the original Captain Marvel in its last couple of years or so before it was put out of business. It's now called Shazam, and it was a really wonderful, wonderful thing. And it just stayed in my memory so much. And and otherwise I read the usual stuff. I read everything. Kids back then read everything. I read Daffy Duck and Superman and Katie Keene and just the only thing I didn't read was war comics. I never liked war comics, but otherwise just westerns. Everything was done back then as comics. It was a shame that that's not the case anymore. And I just kept reading. Every time I would feel like, okay, comics is kind of finished. Something new and exciting would happen. Marvel would happen, and then Vertigo would happen. Alan Moore would happen. So I was always drawn to comics, and then but I didn't particularly. I actually had fantasized writing comics. After graduate school, I took a job teaching English at a college, and I hated it. Everybody hates those kind of jobs. And I wanted to think, what I could do. Oh, no, I had a job at IBM. I really hated that. And so I figured, okay, what should I do? I will try to see if I can get a job writing for Marvel Comics, So I tried. They weren't hiring back then. They had, what's his name? The sidekick doing everything. Stanley's young
yeah. Yeah,
Robin.
Yeah,
doing
Robin.
Yeah. Anyway, so then I got the job teaching for a couple of years, and I just quit and went off to Europe. But anyway, so one night I was giving a lecture on something, and people said to me, "Well, how did you get a job teaching?" As I can see, I was a bit different than the usual academic teachers. I said, "Well, I tried to get a job for Marvel Comics, but they weren't hiring." And boy, did that make my reputation in that school. There was like this gasp, oh my gosh, wow, it was so cool.
That is awesome.
So I was always had an interest in it, but then some years passed, and I met Neil Gaiman at a writers' conference, actually, a retreat, which is a wonderful thing. And he was at that time, he sold one short story, prose, and he talked about wanting to get into comics, and he had the black and whites of a new comic that he said was really great. It was Watchmen by Alan Moore. So I was really hooked, and so I started thinking about what I might want to do, and I started thinking about graphic novels, and I had this idea. I was still hoping to do it these many years later, called Days of the Dead, a fantasy based upon the Mexican Day of the Dead. The premise of was the dead are all the time in the world with us. Just they have their own subculture.
Okay.
Anyway, so I was trying to figure what to do with that, and then I was at another event, and Neil was there, and he introduced me to Stuart Moore from Vertigo. Vertigo was just about starting then, not yet.
Yeah.
And I was telling him how much I admired Doom Patrol, because Doom Patrol was something else set, by Grant Morrison, that had totally renewed my excitement about comics completely. I still think there's a work of genius, Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to Stuart Moore. He said, "Oh, well, you should, Tom Pryor, the editor, you should go speak to him." So I went and spoke to Tom, and I was gushing a lot, and I said, "Well, I don't really plan to write comics, but if there was a monthly comic I'd love to, it would be Doom Patrol,
Right.
Just being a fan, And he said, Grant's going to be leaving soon. You want to send me a sample script?"
Wow.
And in the new collection, I wrote about that, but Tom wrote about his part. He said he'd actually really looking for someone. Yeah. And he was having a lot of trouble finding someone that would be willing to follow Grant, because Grant was so amazing,
Yeah, it's
which
hard to
is
do.
at
Yeah.
all. But and then so he was actually excited to have someone want to do it, and he liked my script, and that became the first episode, the first chapter issue.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's and you co-wrote with Tom on New Gods, because I read that, and
Yes,
that's some really good stuff.
Another dream come true.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
when I wrote my introduction from the first episode of Doom Patrol, I talked about geniuses in comics and comics that were the work of genius, not necessarily the person, but the work. So
yeah.
Captain
Mhm.
Marvel was one,
Yep.
and Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol was another, but also Jack Kirby's New Gods,
Yeah.
which to me is just the most incredible work.
hmm
It was rough. A lot of people thought, well, he wasn't a writer, and yeah, he wasn't, but
hmm
what he did was so deep out of the unconscious. It was
Yeah, it really
just
was.
amazing. So when Tom said, "You want to do New Gods with me," I was so thrilled.
Yeah.
And Tom dropped out fairly early, and I continued. It didn't last too long. There was a whole big shake-up, and they put in a whole new team. But I was just so excited to do that. And
Yeah.
also I did an issue with Superman. That was fun. I got to write an issue with Superman.
That was and reading that New Gods run from you too, it you could tell you both really understand the characters and were having
Yeah.
fun, like using all of them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
bringing Metron into the fold and just having everybody on every page, and it was a lot of fun
It
to
was
read.
great fun. And my whole thing about it was they felt that since Kirby, a lot of people just kind of assumed they were, superpowered, super villains with more superpowers, and that was it.
Mhm. Yep.
And I was like, well, no, they're gods. It's a different thing being a god than
Mhm.
being a superpowered human. And I tried to really look at it from that point of view.
Yep.
And I focused on Highfather, who's a great, great, good
Mhm.
person, right?
Right.
And what he did to his son. I mean, he gave his son to be reared by Satan, basically.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Ordeal. I
Exactly.
mean, it was an amazing thing. So I really delved into that, or tried to. I had a great time doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was a fresh perspective too for that, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to Doom Patrol, because, like you said, Grant Morrison always takes like the wacky and gives it like a realistic foundation almost sometimes. So I guess that's kind of what you did with Codpiece, right? So like you took this character that, like, when you see the full page spread of him, you're like, okay, this is ridiculous, right?
I know.
But his whole origin story is like, he's just someone that has some really bad childhood trauma.
Well, it's so interesting because, like, I was asked by the editor, I can't remember if it was still Tom or it was Lou. It might have been Tom. Anyway, I think Tom said it was him. But anyway, I was asked to do a one-shot so the regular artists could have a break. And I wasn't wild about that because I tend to think in big, like, arcs of 4 or 5 issues.
Mhm.
But when I thought of what I wanted to do, it just came so completely alive. And a lot of people now, they focus on the introduction of Kate, the transgender superhero,
Mhm.
was the first one ever.
Yep.
But Codpiece was the origin of it.
Yeah.
That's what I began with.
Okay.
I've been thinking about Green Arrow.
Yep.
And again, my history of being old and having read stuff way back. So Green Arrow way back was a sort of, knockoff of Batman, right?
Mhm.
Batman and Robin, Green Arrow and Speedy.
Yep.
And his whole shtick was these arrows, right? But he had this little quiver, and that quiver contained a boxing glove arrow, a rocket arrow, fireworks arrows. So,
I'm starting to see the connection now.
yeah, exactly. So I imagine. So what about someone like that? Then I just had this wild idea. I guess sex was one of the themes of Doom Patrol.
Yeah.
that,
Oh yeah.
Why not have it be in a codpiece, a cannon attached to his groin? So I thought, well, why would he do this, right?
Right. What is his motivation?
Yeah. So the trauma. Well, she's in high school, and he says to some girl, "Why don't you go out with me?" She goes, "Oh, I don't know. You're too short."
Yeah.
And she walks away, and her friend says, "What'd you say?" She says, "Oh, I don't know. Whatever came in my mind." She's already forgotten what she said,
Right.
But for him, it was this total trauma, and we follow him, through a few years as he's growing up, and and then this prostitute says to him, he goes to a psychiatrist, this prostitute says to him, "Well, if you're worried about, being too short, why don't you just attach something?"
Yeah.
Okay, I'll show.
Yeah.
So he creates this cannon, and people say to me, "Did you have trouble introducing a transgender superhero?" And I say, "No, the whole issue was Codpiece.
Yeah.
DC didn't care about the other thing because they're worried about what they could get away with Codpiece,
Right. Yeah.
And so,
Exactly.
and so we checked with them, and they checked with legal, and what they said was, as long as it wasn't too long.
That's amazing.
It's a riot,
Oh
And then
my God.
the really daring thing, of course, was they made a photographic cover.
Oh yeah. Oh
Which,
yeah.
these two women looking, oh my gosh, look at that guy.
Yeah. Looking at that.
It was hilarious,
Oh my God. It's an amazing cover. And
it was,
yeah.
Go on.
And I mean, like, just reading it after the Grant Morrison run, like, to still have that like much enjoyment and like fun, and like you said, Doom Patrol's rooted with sex stories too, so it's like all of that, and it just hit the mark. It was so good. And then you talked about introducing the new trans character too, the first trans character all in one issue, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of slid that by them.
Well, one more thing about Codpiece was, a while back I was thinking, well, what if I wanted to do like another, regular kind of comic? And I thought, I could have Codpiece return and be the leader of the incel movement.
Oh,
you know
my
who they
God.
are?
Yeah.
It stands for involuntarily celibate.
Yeah.
And these people, these men, they have this deep, deep grievance against women. The grievance is women don't want to sleep with them.
Right.
It's like, what? It's
right.
What the hell? It's like they think they're entitled to have any woman they ask have sex with.
Oh yeah.
And so they have this deep sense of grievance about this, And so Codpiece would be perfect. That was his whole life,
Oh my God, yeah. You really?
I love that story. I love to see Codpiece become a leader of the incel movement.
I would love to. Like, hey, DC's got Black Label now. This would be the perfect setup for it.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, I would read that book. I would buy 100 copies. Oh my God. And he's the first incel, right? He is the first incel.
Yeah.
Wow.
From where you sit, Rachel, they got the Doom Patrol TV series happening right now. That's following the Grant Morrison run.
Yes,
like they even did Flex Mentallo in it. It's just phenomenal to see that come to life. What are the chances you think that they will do a Codpiece episode?
Well, I would certainly hope so. And you also use some of the other stuff I created. It would be great, you know.
Right.
But we'll see. It's going pretty strong, I gather. And it's great stuff. It's wonderful. So I'm hoping they'll do that. That would be really fun.
And when the issue dropped, were people just like completely in awe about the issue, or like?
Oh, this was quite something actually. This is a kind of I found it a little bit strange actually. I had problems with some of the fans in various kinds of ways. I was too kind of obscure, or too surreal, and I wasn't enough like Grant. I was too much like Grant. All kinds of things that people had trouble with, which, fair enough. That's their attitude, But so we wondered what would the reaction to the story, both to Codpiece and to Kate. And one of the odd reactions was several people wrote in to say that I was insulting them. Not them personally, but all of male fandom. They thought that Codpiece was a satire on male comic book fans.
Oh no!
And I can actually understand it because I get so angry when I see this cliche on TV shows that all comic book fans are 40-year-old men living in their mother's basement and they're fat and never had a date.
Right.
And that's outrageous,
Yeah.
It's outrageous. It's bigoted. So I can understand where they're coming from, but somehow the idea that someone would see a super villain and think it's a satire on them was kind of shocking to me. Even like I said, I can get where they're coming from. I really can. But
Wow.
Are you saying this kind of stuff happened before Twitter?
Handwriting letters? Come on.
Yes, letters columns are quite fascinating, actually. I haven't actually looked at enough, online letters columns in reproducing comics, but the handwritten ones were quite interesting. We had some really interesting letters and some very thoughtful ones. There was one fan who was delighted on pointing out my failures to remember continuity from 1962 or whatever the hell year it was. It was quite something. And we all, I and Tom and Lou, the editors, we just kind of was, him, here goes Charles again. It's like,
He's going off again. Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's
I
amazing.
wrote something. I read something recently. He managed to something in Ahoy, I think it was. I can't remember now what it was, but
Mhm.
something where he jumped into, put it
Wow.
down.
He came back. Wow.
Maybe I just was rereading Doom Patrol and I found a letter by him. I'd forgotten it now, but yeah. But then also
So
people were very personal letters. Some really wonderful ones. I had this wonderful correspondence with this woman. I can't remember where she was from, and we had this great correspondence, for several months, right? And then I get this letter from this guy, and he says, "Okay," he says, "my wife has told me I have to come clean." So he decided for fun to put on this persona of a woman fan and write to me. And I started
wow.
writing back personal letters, just actual letters
Yeah.
back and forth, not
Yeah.
comic. And he kind of felt he was like embarrassed to say that was like a game, He's,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I didn't mind. I was just actually the letters kind of stopped. I think he just stopped writing, which is I love his letters. They're really fascinating,
Wow. That's super interesting.
And then someone else, a young fan in Texas, we still now communicate after all these years later,
Wow. Wow. That's
Yeah.
so cool.
And once I introduce Kate, we every now and then get these amazing letters. Not too often, but one or two are just really make it all worthwhile,
Yeah.
I write about this, and this one person who just wrote, said, no introduction, no leading. It just began. All my life, I thought I was wrong, and then she says, every night I would go to bed and pray to God to change me, and I woke up and God never did, and then she said that, and I only wanted to die, but I was too afraid, and then now I realized I was already dead but didn't know it, But now, because of what you wrote with Kate, and because of some reaction of some friends I told, I believe I can have a life. Isn't that incredible?
Wow. Wow. That is amazing.
And I took that to one of the women who worked at DC. She worked in publicity. Lovely woman. And I didn't say anything. I just handed her the letter. I said, read this,
Yeah.
She started crying. And I knew it was because of the story, but also it's because, back then comics were still a fairly reviled field, the lowest kind of creative work people could think of, And so, but she and I, we knew that comics were great. People were really committed to it, But the outside world looked down on it so much. So the idea that something that we did in DC did in a comic could have that kind of effect on someone's life was so powerful. Other people had the same reaction to it too. I showed the letter too.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great way to kind of transition to. You were there for the not necessarily the early days, but you were there for some of the big days for Vertigo. How was the room? How was the atmosphere? Was it just crazy Wild West comics, or what was going on when you were there?
Well, I was there at the beginning because one of the first comics that with Vertigo was when I took over Doom Patrol. It was a good place to transition from Grant, who was pre-Vertigo. But there wasn't that much, from my perspective, there wasn't that much interaction with the other people. We all read each other's stuff, and I loved what was happening. I loved Grant's further work and Animal Man, all kinds of great stuff that was going on. There wasn't a lot of there wasn't like the bullpen at Marvel Comics kind of thing. So I had some contact with them at DC, and I would go to DC now and then. But it was a great atmosphere. Everyone was excited, and people we believed in what we were doing. We were having fun, wild stuff, and it was great.
And I know, do you keep in contact with Tom?
Yeah. I did a little bit of work for Ahoy Comics, which is you wearing the T-shirt.
Yeah.
And which I really enjoyed doing. I did a Edgar Allan Poe story.
Yep.
A takeoff in his Ligeia, which I had so much fun doing. It was a bit like doing Doom Patrol in a way. My idea was that Ligeia is a porn story.
Oh,
it's a snuff fantasy, actually.
That's hilarious.
And then, but at one point, the fun part was, Tom said it was getting a little bit too just fun stories. I needed to break something up and do something wild. So I had him in his opium den. He's smoking opium, and he's actually in a bar. But he's imagining he's an opium den. And so he says, but now imagine, there was a box, and this box could show us stories.
Yeah, right.
They would be like scenes from a play or arias
Yeah.
from an opera. Scenarios, you might call them.
Yeah.
So he's inventing the computer, the internet, basically, you know.
Yeah, right,
And then
exactly.
he imagines fan letters.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
the
yeah.
first time, oh my God, Mr. Poe, this is the greatest thing in the history of the universe. This is so wonderful. This is so wonderful. But then you think,
Yeah.
perhaps there'd be some who would not be so faithful. He starts
Yeah.
imagining sniping fan letters and critical fan letters. And people
Yes.
say they can
Yep.
do it much better than him. So exactly, of course, what we have in comics, you know,
Yeah,
on the
right.
lists and stuff. So that was so much fun to do. And Tom is just great. Tom's a great editor and a friend.
I read that issue, and I remember where I was when I read that issue because I was on an airplane, and I got to your story and the Edgar Allan Poe. I was like laughing and it was just a great time. But I'm wondering, like, someone looking over my shoulder right now, like seeing a strung out Edgar Allan Poe smoking opium and talking about magical boxes. Like, this is amazing.
You know, I studied Poe in college, graduate school, and I never
Okay.
liked him that much. I always thought he was overdone. You know, I thought he was overrated.
Yeah.
But he always was dropping his hints of his opium dens.
Yep.
And, you know,
Yep.
but according to the historians, actually, he was an alcoholic. He actually wasn't really an opium smoker. That's what they say. I don't know. I haven't done the research myself, but yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
It's always fun to do that, though.
So do you find yourself doing more of that, doing little shorter stories within like these anthologies rather than doing your own comic series again?
Well, I'm going to see what's going to happen. I got a couple things I'm looking at. There's a graphic novel I'd like to do. But, you know, Joe Corallo, who's an editor and a writer, he's been great. He really brought me back into comics, actually, almost single-handedly. He's just like, I don't know how he found my work, or he's just a longtime fan of it, but he just started reaching out to me to do things.
That's awesome.
He had me do a story for this anthology in support of Planned Parenthood called Mine. Had me do some other stuff, you know. And so that just kind of brought me back somewhat. And I'm really delighted because I love doing comics. It's one of my favorite kinds of work to do.
That's great to hear. And
we should say that in between that time, you developed this other career as a novelist, correct?
Well, I've written about 7 or 8 novels now. Won a couple of awards and stuff. And I've been writing tarot books for a long time. And the books came first, actually. My first novel and my first tarot book were both published in 1980. And the novel disappeared without a trace, pretty much. Someone once told me that my first 3 novels were thought to be debut novels because the first 2 were forgotten immediately. But then the third one won a big award, so that was kind of nice. But then also my first tarot book was published in 1980 as well, almost exactly the same time. And that book's been in print ever since and sold all over the world.
I've heard a lot of great things about that book, but I myself, I have no idea what a tarot book is. So can you explain that a little bit?
Well, you know, tarot cards are these mysterious 78 cards with pictures on them. And people use them for fortune telling, but they have a much deeper level of tradition, including occult mysteries and alchemy and, you know, magical transformations. And they're also just beautiful images, you know. And so I just started getting into it when I got a deck. I loved it, and I started making stuff up, inspired by the pictures. And eventually I started teaching a class, and then out of the class came my first book. And so in my book, what was always the thing about that time was tarot writing was split between strict fortune-telling book. You know, this card means this. If you get this card, it means such and such, you know. Next card, you know. And books on the occult, which are impossible to read unless you have already a very deep base of knowledge of all these traditions. And there was a huge gulf between them. And I was interested in the cards as psychological, as reflections of ourselves, but also very much as, how to say this, going very deep into it, so not just fortune telling, but staying with the psychological and the mythical and the spiritual, rather than getting into esoteric and magical things. So no one had done that before, so it had a big impact and still does.
Wow.
I get letters from people. I get letters from people who say that it saved their lives.
Wow.
Yeah, 2 or 3 times people told me this, that, you know, they were one person said she was from Korea. She just wrote to me. I wrote her, I asked if I could use it in a book. She said yes, and she just began by saying I was lying in this bed staring at the ceiling all the time, couldn't move, couldn't do anything. And then says, and then I found the tarot in your book, and that saved my life.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And
amazing thing,
That is amazing. I mean, this is kind of the first time I've heard these stories from a writer, and I mean, it's got to be amazing to hear those things.
Yeah, so Doom Patrol saved somebody, this,
Yeah, right.
This transgender girl who was going downhill really badly, and
yeah,
the tarot book saved 2 or 3 people who were in really bad shape,
You're the superhero of writers.
One person has a store in New England where he sells interesting, books and occult things and tarot decks. And so the first time I went there, I was just having a great time in the store, and he was showing me around, And I think I told him who I was, and I signed some books for him, And I was admiring Caduceus, that thing with the 2 snakes wound around a stick,
Yep.
And silver with a opal, I think it's a beautiful piece, actually topaz. And I said, well, it's a bit beyond my means. I gave it to him to put it back. He said, keep it. I said, what? He said, keep it. I said, why? I said, you saved my life. Just like that. Yeah.
Wow.
He also said, I think his partner had died of cancer or something, and he was going downhill really badly. And then he, found some people to help, and then he also, found the cards, and he found my book, and that just pulled him out of it,
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's an amazing experience to have someone tell you that. It's
that is. That's got to feel
the power
great.
of art.
Yeah. And I love that the other place that happened was comics.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that is pretty amazing, especially like you said at a time when people almost look down at it. Right.
And tarot cards also at that time were very
tarot card. Yeah, right.
It's only very, very recently that tarot cards have gotten any kind of respect at all in the public forum,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because what are they seen as, like some weird mysticism or something like that?
Oh, no, just cheap fortune-telling tricks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And so the New York Times, if it ever mentioned tarot, it was always in one of 2 contexts. One was, gullible, stupid people who are cheated out of fortunes by fake fortune tellers, And the other was, it was doing an article about the failures of people to predict the stock market or to predict elections. They say, you might as well go see a tarot reader.
Oh my God.
So that was the 2 ways but recently they've had articles about the tarot and becoming popular. And
that's great.
And that woman who was on Jeopardy, who became the first woman to win over $1 million, and she was a fan of my work and mentioned it. So that was kind of nice,
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
So I was just gonna say, so you had all these novels come out, and then you said, so after you left Vertigo, you wrote more novels. You kind of went back into that space.
Yeah, I've been doing it all along too. I've done some stuff while I was at Vertigo, but then I went back to writing novels and also writing nonfiction books, tarot and related subjects. I've written, my most recent count was, I think it's 45, 46 books. Some of which are very obscure, but some of which, have done really well or have gotten attention.
So that's a lot of output.
Well, I love writing. It's my life to write. So
yeah,
I've been publishing for a long time now. So yeah.
And then you mentioned you kind of got back into comics recently, and you've done some anthology work and all of that.
Yeah.
But you've also kind of mentioned that there's some other things, maybe more long form, that you're looking to do. Is any of that in the works currently, or can you talk about any of that?
Well, right now we're looking to do a reissue of a comic called Time Breakers that I and Chris Weston, the artist, did for Stuart Moore's Helix imprint. Helix was a science fiction offshoot of Vertigo.
Yep.
And that was about time travel. And I loved doing it. I thought Chris's art was incredible, one of the best artists I've ever worked with. So we'd like to sort of have a reissue of that, with somebody. We have the rights, and we're going to see if that can be done. But I'd really interested in doing a sequel to that, possibly. The further adventures kind of thing. So there's that, and then some other things that are a little bit vague at the moment. But the Mexican Day of the Dead sort of novel, graphic novel, is something I'd really love to do.
Yeah. It sounds very interesting too.
Plus, there's one or two of my short stories I thought of doing graphic novel adaptations of, which would really be. I'd love to do that as well.
Are those like fantasy short stories, or
The stories inspired by mythology. So basically, I take a famous myth from like ancient Sumeria or something like that, and then I sort of bring it into a kind of. So they're not just the gods are not now real people; they're still gods, but they're in the real world.
Okay.
In one particular story called Forever, it's the goddess of death loses a bet with her sisters, the goddess of earth and sky, of ocean and sky, and so because if she lost this bet, she has to live in the body of a human woman for 24 hours, and she thinks it'll be horrible, but at least it'll be over very quickly. And then as soon as she's in there, she forgets who she is, and so she thinks she's this woman who's having all these struggles and difficulties and having weird dreams and stuff, And then she falls in love with this woman. She meets some guy, goes out with him, and not necessarily sexual love, but a kind of, friendship, romantic love with his sister. Then the sister gets sick, and meanwhile there's this healing tree that someone has been writing about, magical healing. And so the goddess of death, who doesn't know she's the goddess of death, decides to take her sick friend to this tree to cheat death. And
wow,
that was one of my favorite stories. And if that could be adapted to some others, I would be interested to adapt as well.
Wow, yeah, that sounds interesting. Cool.
I think a lot of my stories have a kind of very visual comic book kind of level.
I was going to say, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I see them, as well as conceptualize them. So
that's cool.
I think my lifetime reading comics influences everything I write. It may even be why I'm able to write about tarot in the way that people can really connect to.
I was going to say, because there's connection to the art as well.
Yeah, words and pictures. Yeah, exactly. I never thought about that, but it's quite possible that. Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I think a good way to kind of wrap us up here would be to ask you, is there any way you could see yourself coming back to some of the stuff like the DC stuff you did in the past, like another Doom Patrol run, or maybe even just a little short story or something like that?
I'm not sure DC wants me to, but I would love to do it. Yeah, that'd be great.
Really?
As far as I know, I have no contacts there now.
Okay.
The people I know have all gone on to other things,
Yeah, I picture
I would love doing that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I picture the big number issue where they get everyone to come back, and then let's bring back Rachel for one 4-page story or something.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
And it's funny you say that, because I think a lot of people from that time are doing smaller indie publishing stuff or publishing their own stuff. And it was almost something to be said about the state of storytelling in comics now is the big two aren't really taking risks or doing crazy things that a lot of us still enjoy. We want to have fun comics and stuff that break the norm, and we don't really see that nowadays. So,
well, it's such a huge business now.
Yeah,
because both of them are they're part of something much bigger, but the much bigger is gigantic businesses. So when something gets that big, they don't take a lot of chances.
Yeah,
because can you imagine now, like, let's just take Marvel, since they're the bigger of the two right now. You're at Marvel and you walk in, you're like, I got this idea for this character. He's gonna have a giant codpiece with a cannon on him. And then some exec's like, I don't think that's gonna work as a movie.
How can we make a 3-movie deal out of that?
I'll tell you what I always wanted to do. When I had Doom Patrol, that they told me we couldn't do. It was called the Dead Quartet. And the Dead Quartet were 4 dead people who come back to people in trouble to help them. It was based on the fact that people claim that Elvis Presley appears to them when they're down and out, when the Virgin Mary appears to people when they're desperate. So it was going to be Elvis Presley, the Virgin Mary, and I can't remember who the other 2 were back then. I later did it as a story. And I had Nelson Mandela, and I forget who the other woman was. Princess Di.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, so the idea, my story, the Dead Quartet got sick of, ungrateful people, helping ungrateful people. So they decided to become villains. And so Doom Patrol have to defeat the Virgin Mary, Elvis Presley. and DC said, no, we can't do this. We can't run afoul of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And the Graceland people are ferocious.
Yeah, you don't want to mess with them.
Like you never saw, So
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
do it.
You don't mess with Graceland.
Yeah. And they pointed out something. There's something interesting. If you see a story in which Elvis Presley is a character, they often don't call him the king.
Yeah.
Because the name Elvis Presley is not just is trademarked.
Really?
You cannot use the name Elvis Presley without permission from Graceland. Isn't that wild?
Wow.
That's what
I
they
did
told
not
me.
know.
That's what they pointed out to me. So when I did the story, I did in fact, I think I actually might have called him Elvis. I'm not sure of my story.
Yeah.
But it was a story published in a magazine, a science fiction magazine, so it was not going to get the same kind of attention as a comic book,
That's so funny. Oh man, that is awesome. That would have been wild. Yeah, I can see where they get a little upset about fighting the Virgin Mary. I would have found it.
Yeah.
I would have been down for that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I want to read that now. Like I need to read that.
My first published short story, way back in 1971, I guess it was a story about the Virgin Mary, among other things, and in it, this woman she's arrested by the vagina police for improper orgasm. This was back when Masters and Johnson were doing all these physiological studies of orgasms,
Oh my God, yes.
Contractions were 7.8 seconds apart and stuff like this,
Oh, wow.
Anyway, but then it turns out that the men arresting her are actually angels. Because, in fact, they're trying to restore her memory that she's the Virgin Mary.
Oh,
and
my
she's
God.
come back to Earth to warn people of this monster beast. It was this evil, slouching beast waiting to be born, which comes from W.B. Yeats' poem, the second comic.
Yeah.
And in it, in my story, the angels hail the Virgin, oh, hail the Virgin. She goes, oh, God, they still think that about me? They haven't learned the truth yet?
So good.
The implication in my story was she was a slut.
Yeah. That is amazing.
That reminds me of the movie Dogma, where I think it was Chris Rock who was. Yeah, it was like, the Virgin Mary was a virgin when Jesus was born, but to think that a married couple never got down.
Someone told me recently that, in fact, to keep her purity intact for the church dogma, she was a virgin for all her births. For Jesus' brother James, for his sister,
Yeah. Oh.
So Joseph must have been one pissed off guy,
He was the first incel.
There we go. There's the origin.
I can see the story coming out of that for sure.
What if Codpiece descended from? Oh no!
Or better yet, Codpiece makes the incel movement big, and there's mysterious man lurking around. And it's Joseph.
My God. And it's Joseph. Oh no!
He's been around all this time.
Oh my God! In the shadows.
He's the wandering Jew. He's never got laid, so he can't die. That story about the Virgin Mary, where it comes from, I was teaching at a college, and one of my good friends was a graduate student who had a part-time job there, and he was a former Jesuit candidate.
Okay.
And the Jesuits are wild people, apparently. He was wild. He had the greatest sense of humor. We would just trade these wild things back and forth. So that story was inspired by my conversations with him. It was really fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is so. That's wild.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
So Rachel, we don't want to take up too much of your time. We appreciate every second you've given us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Is there? Do you do anything online? Is there anywhere people can follow you if they want to see your work?
I have a website that's under revision for some time. It's just rachelpollack.com. I have a blog which I haven't used in a long time. There's a lot of old stuff in it which people might be interested in. That's rachelpollack.wordpress.com. Otherwise, I'm on Facebook fairly often. I don't really like doing Twitter and others that much, but because I like to do long stuff, so I can do longer things on Facebook. But and my friends are about full, but people can follow me, and they'll see what I'm doing.
Awesome.
Great. Awesome. So everybody out there, I'll have the links down below for those. so you can check out all of Rachel's work.
Yeah, thank you.
Make sure to go check it all out. Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time with us. Thank you
Oh, it was
for
fun.
humoring two guys who like to joke around about Codpiece.
Oh,
Yeah,
we
thank you
appreciate
so
every
much.
second
This
you
is a
give
I
dream
us.
love
come
that.
true.
I just love that you two guys exist, I mean,
That brings me so much joy.
yeah, because it's usually not the villains that get so much attention,
Yeah. Oh my!
and not such a crazy villain.